Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into some really cool research about how our brains represent hand shapes.
And not just when we're actually using our hands.
Right. Not just when we're actually using our hands.
But when we're just imagining them.
Yeah, like when you're thinking about picking up a coffee cup or something like that.
Exactly.
So to get into this, we'll be looking at a study that used some pretty advanced technology.
Yeah, cutting edge stuff.
Yeah, to record brain activity in a tetraplegic patient.
So someone who's lost the use of all four limbs.
Right. And this gave the researchers a unique window into the neural code for different hand shapes.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Okay, so how did they actually study this? Did they just ask him to think about his hands?
Well, they got inspiration from a classic game.
Okay.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Oh, I love that game.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So they had the participant imagine making those hand shapes.
Yeah, rock, paper, scissors.
While they recorded the activity in specific areas of his brain. Okay, and what did they find? Could they actually tell which hand shape he was imagining?
You bet they could. Just by looking at the patterns of brain activity,
Ow.
they were able to decode the participants' imagined hand shapes with pretty remarkable accuracy.
So even though he couldn't physically move his hand, his brain was still generating distinct signals for each shape.
That's exactly right. And it really highlights this fact that our brains can create these mental representations, even without any physical movement.
So it's like his brain was running a simulation of the action,
Yeah, you could say that.
even though his body couldn't carry it out.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
That's wild. So they figured out that our brains can represent these basic hand shapes.
Right.
But did they try anything more complex?
Yeah, they did. They actually took it a step further
Okay.
and included two more hand shapes,
Okay.
a pinch and a spherical grasp.
So pinching something small and then cupping your hand around a ball.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Instead of showing him actual objects to grasp,
Right.
they presented these shapes as images.
Oh, interesting.
A cartoon lizard for the pinch,
A cartoon lizard.
and a photo of Leonard Nimoy as Spock for the spherical grasp.
Oh, wow.
So it was getting a little abstract.
Wait, so they were asking him to imagine pinching a cartoon lizard.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's even weirder than I thought.
It might sound a bit strange, but there's a good reason for it.
Okay.
The researchers weren't interested in how the brain reacts to real objects that you can touch and feel.
Gotcha.
They wanted to know if it could link abstract symbols
Mm,
to these specific hand configurations.
I see.
So like the shape of your hand when you're pinching versus when you're grasping.
Okay, and could it? Could his brain make that connection?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Even though the images weren't real objects that you could physically grasp,
Right.
they found distinct neural activity associated with each shape. So basically, his brain was saying pinch when it saw the lizard and spherical grasp when it saw Spock.
That's so cool.
Even though he wasn't actually interacting with anything physically.
So our brains can create these connections between abstract ideas and physical actions.
That's what it seems like.
But how does all of this work in the real world?
Yep.
We're not just sitting around thinking about lizards and Spock all day. We're using our hands constantly, and we're always taking in information from our senses.
Yeah, you're right. It's much more complex than that.
So how did they factor that into the study?
Well, they introduced what's called a cue conflict task.
Okay, a cue conflict task. What's that?
They basically presented the participant with both visual and auditory cues.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes they matched, and sometimes they didn't.
Okay.
And they asked him to focus his attention on one or the other.
So, they might show him a picture of a fist,
Right.
but at the same time, play a sound that usually goes with a pinch,
Exact.
and then see how his brain reacts.
That's the idea.
Wow, that's clever.
So what they found was when the participant was focusing on the visual cues,
Okay.
his brain decoded the information really quickly and accurately.
Okay.
But when he had to pay attention to the auditory cues,
Uh-huh.
it took his brain longer to process the information.
Interesting.
And the decoding wasn't quite as accurate.
So visual information has a kind of advantage when it comes to hand shapes.
It seems that way.
There's a shortcut in the brain between what we see and what we intend to do with our hands.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
And this was true even after years of paralysis.
That's right. Even after all that time, his brain still showed a really strong connection between seeing and intending to grasp.
That's incredible. We've covered so much already, from rock, paper, scissors to Spock and lizards, and we're just getting started.
So now you might be wondering why this research is so important.
Yeah, it's all super interesting,
Right.
but like, where does it actually lead? What's the practical application of all this?
Well, think about the possibilities for people with paralysis or other conditions that limit their movement. Imagine if we could develop technology
Yeah.
that allows them to control prosthetic limbs or even computer cursors just by thinking about the movements they want to make.
So instead of needing like joysticks or other complex controls,
Right.
they could basically just think their way around.
Exactly.
That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But this study brings us one step closer to making that a reality. The fact that researchers could decode these complex hand shapes from brain activity,
Right.
even someone who hasn't been able to move their hands in years,
Yeah.
is incredibly promising.
Okay, I can see how this could be a game changer for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
But how do we actually get from decoding brain signals to like actually controlling real-world devices?
Right. That's the big question.
Yeah.
That's where the field of brain-computer interfaces comes in.
Okay, brain-computer interfaces.
Or BCIs for short.
BCIs. Got it.
Researchers are working on developing devices that can read these brain signals and then translate them into commands for external devices.
So they're basically building a bridge between the brain and the machine.
Exactly. And this study provides some really crucial insights into how to build that bridge effectively.
Okay, I'm looking.
By understanding how the brain represents these different hand shapes,
Right.
we can develop BCIs that are more intuitive and more responsive to the user's intentions.
So instead of just thinking like open hand or closed hand,
Right.
someone could potentially control a prosthetic hand with much more nuance and dexterity.
Precisely.
Wow.
They could imagine picking up a delicate object with a pinch grip or making a fist to grasp something firmly,
Right.
and the BCI would translate those imagined actions into real-world movements.
That's amazing. And to think, this research all started with something as simple as rock, paper, scissors.
I know, right?
It just goes to show that even seemingly basic games can unlock these profound insights into how our brains work.
Absolutely.
And the implications go way beyond just controlling prosthetic limbs.
Well, for sure.
This research could also lead to advancements in areas like rehabilitation therapy,
Right.
virtual reality, even gaming.
Exactly. The possibilities are pretty vast.
It sounds like the possibilities are pretty much endless.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's still some challenges to overcome before we see this technology being used everywhere.
Of course, there are always hurdles.
Yeah.
On the technical side, we need to improve the accuracy and speed of decoding these brain signals.
Okay.
And we need to make the technology more portable and user-friendly.
Right, because I imagine it's probably pretty bulky and expensive right now.
You're right, cost is definitely a factor.
Yeah.
But as with any new technology, the costs tend to come down over time as research advances and manufacturing processes become more efficient.
So it's really just a matter of time before this kind of technology becomes more accessible to everyone.
I believe so.
That's exciting.
The progress we've seen in recent years has been remarkable.
Yeah.
And the pace of innovation is only accelerating.
It's definitely an exciting time to be following this field.
For sure.
Okay, but let's back up a bit.
Okay.
We've been talking a lot about BCIs and prosthetic limbs and all that.
Right.
But this research also tells us something fundamental about how our brains work, right? Even for people who don't have mobility impairments.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
One of the key takeaways from this study is the sheer power and flexibility of the human brain.
Okay.
Even when the body is limited, the mind can still explore the world, imagine new possibilities,
Yeah.
and even shape our reality through intention.
That's pretty profound.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that brings us to another fascinating finding from this study.
Okay, tell me more.
It has to do with the specific brain regions
Okay.
that are involved in representing these imagined hand shapes.
Okay, I'm all ears.
They focused on two areas within the posterior parietal cortex,
Posterior parietal cortex.
or PPC,
PPC. Got it.
which is a part of the brain involved in planning and coordinating movements.
Right.
One area is called AIP,
AIP.
and the other is called BA5.
BA5.
And what they found out about these areas is pretty interesting.
Okay, what did they find?
They discovered that these two areas seem to have slightly different roles when it comes to hand actions.
Interesting.
AIP appears to be more specialized for intending grasp movements,
Okay.
while BA5 is more involved in processing visual information about objects.
So AIP is like the grasping center of the brain.
You could think of it that way.
Interesting.
The researchers found that neurons in AIP were highly active during the imagined grasping tasks, even when there wasn't an actual object to look at.
Okay.
In contrast, neurons in BA5 were mainly active when the participant was looking at the visual cues.
So AIP is all about intention,
Yeah.
while BA5 is more about perception.
That's a good way to put it. And this distinction is important because it suggests that the brain sort of divides labor when it comes to complex actions like grasping.
So different parts of the brain are specialized for different parts of the task.
Exactly. Different brain regions specialize in different aspects of the task.
Wow.
And they all work together seamlessly
Okay.
to produce a smooth and coordinated movement.
This just keeps getting more and more complex.
It does, doesn't it?
But it's also incredibly fascinating. Okay, we've learned a lot about how our brains represent hand shapes, both real and imagined.
Right.
And we've even touched on the potential of this research for developing amazing new technologies. So we talk about these two brain areas, AIP and BA5,
Right?
and how they seem to have these different roles when it comes to hand actions.
Yeah, like a division of labor.
But why is that distinction so important? What does it mean for the bigger picture?
Well, it has some really interesting implications for how we design brain-computer interfaces in the future.
Okay, BCIs.
Yeah, BCIs, exactly.
So if we want to create devices that can really understand what a user intends to do
Right.
and translate that into fluid, natural movements,
Yeah.
we need to target the right brain areas.
Exactly. We need to be precise.
So for a BCI that controls a prosthetic hand, for example,
Right.
we wouldn't just want to read any brain activity that's related to hand movement. Focus specifically on the signals coming from AIP.
Exactly. Because AIP seems to be more closely linked to the intention to grasp. It's about deciphering the language of the brain.
Wow, the language of the brain.
Yeah.
And this study gives us a valuable glimpse into that language, specifically for hand actions.
Exactly. It's a fascinating starting point.
This is all so fascinating. Yeah, it really is.
We started with a simple game of rock, paper, scissors.
I know, right?
And now we're talking about the future of brain-computer interfaces.
It's amazing.
And unlocking the secrets of human intention.
It's incredible how far we can go with a single study sometimes.
It really is incredible.
Yeah.
So what does all this mean for the average person? What's the takeaway message here?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways is that our brains are capable of much more than we often give them credit for.
That's a good point.
Even when our bodies are limited,
Yeah.
our minds can still explore the world, imagine new possibilities,
Okay.
and even shape our reality through intention.
It makes you wonder about the potential of things like mental practice and visualization.
Right.
If our brains can represent hand shapes so vividly just by imagining them.
Yeah.
Could imagining ourselves performing a task actually help us improve our skills in real life?
That's a great question, and one that researchers are actively exploring.
So there's a chance that all that daydreaming we do might actually be helpful. It's possible.
Instead of just a waste of time.
Well, there's growing evidence that mental practice can enhance performance in a lot of different areas, from sports to music to even surgery. It seems that by just imagining ourselves performing an action, we can actually strengthen the neural pathways involved in that action.
So it's like a mental workout for our brains.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. And that makes it easier to actually perform the action in the real world.
So maybe we should all be spending more time daydreaming and visualizing ourselves achieving our goals.
Maybe so. It's certainly an interesting idea.
Who knows? It might actually help make those goals a reality.
It's worth a try.
That's a great note to end on.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of imagined hand shapes.
It's been an amazing journey.
And until next time, keep those neurons firing.